You're unemployed? The woman across the table didn't even try to hide her disappointment. She glanced at her phone, forced a polite smile, and stood up before Ethan Carter could finish his sentence. I just don't think we're looking for the same things, she said. 30 seconds later, she was gone. Ethan watched the restaurant door close behind her and let out a quiet breath. The waiter approached with an awkward expression and asked if he wanted to order dinner anyway. Ethan smiled and nodded. Sure. I already drove 40 minutes to get here. It wasn't the first time this had happened. In fact, it was the 7th blind date in less than 4 months that had ended almost exactly the same way. Different woman, different restaurant, same result. As Ethan sat alone at a corner table in a small Chicago diner, most people would have assumed they were looking at an ordinary man in his late 30s. His jeans were faded. His jacket had clearly seen better days. His watch looked inexpensive. The old sedan parked outside had more than 180,000 miles on it. Nothing about him suggested wealth. Nothing about him suggested power. And that was exactly how Ethan wanted it. What nobody in that restaurant knew was that Ethan wasn't unemployed. He wasn't struggling to pay rent. He wasn't trying to figure out his future. Ethan Carter was the founder and CEO of one of the fastest growing technology companies in America. His company employed thousands of people. Business magazines regularly featured his face on their covers. Financial analysts estimated his net worth at well over $2 billion. Yet none of that had helped him find someone who genuinely cared about who he was. Years earlier, when people discovered his success, everything changed. Conversations became interviews. Dates became negotiations. Compliments felt rehearsed. Interest felt conditional. The more money he made, the harder it became to trust anyone. Eventually, Ethan decided on an experiment. He stopped mentioning his company. He stopped arriving in luxury vehicles. He created a simple version of himself and introduced that version on every blind date. The results were depressing. Most women lost interest within minutes. Some politely excused themselves. Others asked questions that felt less like curiosity and more like financial screening. Tonight had been no different. Ethan looked around the diner. Families were sharing meals. Friends were laughing over coffee. An older couple sat near the window, talking quietly while holding hands across the table. Ethan found himself staring at them longer than he intended. For a moment, he wondered what it felt like to have someone choose you after knowing everything about you. Not your bank account, not your title, just you. He paid the check, thanked the staff, and stepped outside into the cool evening air. The city lights reflected off nearby buildings as he unlocked his aging sedan. Another failed date. Another reminder that his experiment seemed to be proving the same painful point. But as Ethan started the engine and prepared to drive home, his phone lit up with a new message from a friend. It contained only one sentence. I know someone you should meet. Ethan almost ignored it. He had every reason to. He just didn't know that this one message was about to change the course of his entire life. By the time Ethan pulled into the underground garage beneath his downtown building, it was nearly 10 o'clock. The city outside was still alive with traffic and lights, but inside the private elevator, there was only silence. He leaned against the wall and stared at his reflection in the polished steel doors. The worn jacket, the inexpensive shoes, the version of himself he had carefully created. Most people spent years trying to look successful. Ethan spent years trying to hide it. When the elevator opened, he stepped into a penthouse that stretched across the entire top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline. Original artwork hung on the walls. Every detail had been designed by some of the best architects and designers in the country. Yet the luxury no longer impressed him. It had become background noise. Ethan loosened his collar and walked toward the kitchen. Before he could pour himself a glass of water, his phone buzzed again. The message from his friend was still waiting. I know someone. You should meet. This time there was another text underneath it. Her name is Sarah Mitchell. Ethan sighed and typed back immediately. No more blind dates. I am done. 3 dots appeared. Then another message arrived. Trust me. She is different. Ethan almost laughed. He had heard those exact words before. Different. Genuine. Down to earth. Every introduction started the same way. Most ended before dessert arrived. The next morning, Ethan was back in his real world. The world nobody from his dates ever saw. He stepped into the headquarters of Carter Technologies, where hundreds of employees were already moving through the lobby. Several people greeted him by name. Executives waited for him in conference rooms. Investors expected updates. Reporters were requesting interviews. His schedule was booked down to the minute. During a quarterly strategy meeting, one executive congratulated him on another record-breaking year. Another projected future revenue growth onto a giant screen. The numbers were impressive. The room applauded. Ethan smiled politely, but his thoughts drifted elsewhere. At lunch, his friend Michael appeared unexpectedly at the office. Michael had known Ethan since college, long before the money, long before the company, long before success complicated everything. He sat across from Ethan and immediately got to the point. "You did not answer my message." Ethan shook his head. "Because I already know how this story ends." Michael laughed. "No, you think you know." Ethan looked unconvinced. Michael leaned forward. "Sarah is not looking for a rich guy. She is not looking for someone to rescue her. Honestly, she barely has time to date at all." Ethan raised an eyebrow. That was new. "Why?" Michael smiled. "Because she is busy raising her son." Ethan said nothing. Michael continued. "She works hard. She takes care of her family. She has been through challenges, but she keeps moving forward. She is one of the kindest people I know." For the first time, Ethan felt a small crack in the wall of skepticism he had built around himself. Not because Michael was trying to convince him, because Michael almost never recommended anyone. As the conversation ended, Michael handed him a small piece of paper with a phone number written on it. Ethan stared at it after his friend left. Then he folded it carefully and slipped it into his pocket. He told himself he probably would not call. He told himself he had learned his lesson. But later that evening, as he sat alone in a home that felt far too large for one person, he found himself unfolding that piece of paper and reading the number one more time. For 3 days, Ethan did not call the number. He stayed busy with meetings, presentations, and decisions that affected thousands of employees. Yet somehow his mind kept returning to a small folded piece of paper sitting in the drawer of his desk. By Friday evening, curiosity finally won. He took out his phone, entered the number, and stared at the screen for several seconds before pressing call. The line rang twice. Then a warm voice answered. "Hello." Ethan immediately understood why Michael had described her differently. There was nothing rehearsed about her voice. Nothing overly eager. Nothing that sounded like she was trying to impress anyone. "Hi, Sarah. My name is Ethan Carter. Michael gave me your number." There was a brief pause before she laughed softly. "Michael has been trying to play matchmaker again, has he?" Ethan smiled despite himself. "It appears so." The conversation started simply. They talked about Chicago traffic, favorite restaurants, and how unpredictable the weather could be. 30 minutes passed without either of them noticing. For the first time in a long time, Ethan did not feel like he was participating in an interview. Sarah never asked what kind of car he drove. She never asked about investments, property, or career status. In fact, she seemed far more interested in whether he enjoyed what he did with his time than how much money he earned doing it. Before ending the call, Ethan suggested meeting for coffee the following weekend. Sarah hesitated for a moment. "I would like that, but I should probably mention something first." Ethan felt his stomach tighten slightly. "Okay. I have an 8-year-old son named Noah. He keeps me pretty busy." Ethan found himself smiling again. "That does sound busy." "Very busy," she replied with a laugh. "Just wanted you to know before we meet." After the call ended, Ethan sat quietly in his penthouse, staring out at the city lights. Most people might have viewed Sarah's situation as complicated. Surprisingly, he did not. If anything, her honesty made him respect her more. The following Saturday arrived faster than expected. Ethan chose the same approach he always used. Simple clothes. Old sedan. No mention of his company. No mention of his wealth. The coffee shop Michael had suggested sat on a quiet corner several miles from downtown. Ethan arrived 10 minutes early. As he waited near the entrance, he wondered whether this date would end like all the others. Then the door opened. A woman stepped inside wearing a light blue sweater and carrying the confidence of someone who had learned how to handle life without expecting it to be easy. She spotted him immediately and smiled. Not the practiced smile he had seen so many times before. A genuine one. Ethan stood as she approached. "Sarah?" She nodded. Ethan. Neither of them knew it yet, but the next hour was about to feel very different from every date Ethan had experienced in years. And for the first time in a long time, he found himself hoping it would. The first few minutes surprised Ethan. Normally, early conversations felt predictable. There was always a moment when curiosity shifted toward income, status, or future earning potential. With Sarah, that moment never came. Instead, she asked him what books he enjoyed reading. She asked about places he wanted to visit someday. She laughed when he admitted that he secretly preferred small-town diners over expensive restaurants. Before long, their coffee cups were empty, but neither seemed eager to leave. Sarah had an easy way of making people feel comfortable. She listened carefully before responding. She never interrupted. More importantly, she seemed completely uninterested in impressing anyone. Ethan found that refreshing. At one point, she checked her watch and smiled apologetically. I promised Noah I would be home by noon. Saturdays are usually our day together. Ethan nodded. What does he like to do? Her face immediately brightened. Everything. Baseball. Science experiments. Building things that somehow leave my living room looking like a construction site. Ethan laughed. Sounds like a full-time job. It is, Sarah replied. The best one I have ever had. There was something about the way she spoke about her son that caught Ethan's attention. He had met people who mentioned their children out of obligation. Sarah spoke about Noah with genuine pride. As they continued talking, Ethan learned more about her life. She worked as an office manager for a local medical practice. The hours could be demanding, but she appreciated the stability. Raising a child on her own had not always been easy. There had been difficult years, unexpected expenses, and moments of uncertainty. Yet Sarah never described herself as a victim. She talked about challenges the same way she talked about Chicago winters. They were simply things you learned to navigate. Ethan admired that attitude more than he expected. For nearly 2 hours, the conversation flowed effortlessly. When they finally stood to leave, Ethan realized something unusual. He had not spent the entire date waiting for disappointment. In fact, he had genuinely enjoyed himself. Outside the coffee shop, a cool breeze moved through the street as pedestrians passed by carrying shopping bags and cups of coffee. Sarah smiled. Thank you for today. Thank you for saying yes to it, Ethan replied. She laughed softly. Michael would never let me hear the end of it if I had said no. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Would you like to do this again sometime? Ethan almost smiled at how simple the question sounded. No games. No hidden meaning. Just honest interest. I would like that very much. They exchanged numbers, and Sarah headed toward her car. Ethan watched her drive away before walking back to his own aging sedan. As he settled into the driver's seat, he noticed something he had not felt after a date in years. Hope. Not certainty. Not excitement fueled by fantasy. Just a quiet sense that maybe this story would be different. Meanwhile, several miles away, Sarah pulled into the driveway of a modest home where an energetic 8-year-old boy was already waiting near the front window. The moment she stepped inside, Noah looked up from the model rocket he had been building and asked a question that would unexpectedly change everything. Mom, he said, was he nice? Sarah smiled as she hung her coat near the door. Yes, she answered. He was nice. Noah looked relieved, as if that answer mattered more than he wanted to admit. Nicer than the last guy? He asked. Sarah laughed. Much nicer than the last guy. Noah nodded with approval and returned to his model rocket, but Sarah noticed the small smile on his face. Like many children, he paid closer attention than most adults realized. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan and Sarah continued talking almost every day. Sometimes it was a quick phone call during lunch. Sometimes it was a conversation that stretched late into the evening after Noah had gone to bed. Ethan found himself looking forward to hearing her voice. More importantly, he found himself talking about things he rarely shared with anyone. Sarah had a way of making people feel heard. She remembered small details. She asked thoughtful questions. She never seemed impressed by status, yet she cared deeply about character. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah invited Ethan to join them at a community science fair where Noah would be presenting a project. Ethan hesitated. Meeting a child felt different from going on a date. It carried weight, responsibility, meaning. But after a moment, he agreed. The event took place at a local elementary school gymnasium. Folding tables filled the room, each covered with posters, models, and enthusiastic students explaining their projects. When Ethan arrived, Sarah greeted him warmly and led him toward Noah's display. There he is, she said. Noah looked up from his project and studied Ethan carefully. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Noah extended his hand. Mom says you like science. Ethan shook it seriously. Your mom is correct. Noah pointed proudly toward his display. Mine is about rockets. Ethan spent the next 20 minutes listening as Noah explained every detail with the enthusiasm only an 8-year-old could possess. Most adults might have nodded politely. Ethan asked real questions. He listened. He paid attention. By the end of the conversation, Noah seemed completely comfortable around him. As they walked through the fair, Noah remained close by Ethan's side, occasionally pointing out exhibits he found interesting. At one point, Sarah watched them from a short distance away. Ethan was helping Noah adjust part of a display while the boy excitedly explained another idea. Something about the scene touched her more than she expected. Later, while Noah participated in a group activity, Sarah and Ethan sat together on a nearby bench. "You are good with kids," she said. Ethan smiled. "I like him." Sarah looked toward Noah. "He likes you too." The simple comment stayed with Ethan for the rest of the day. Long after he returned home, he found himself thinking about Sarah and Noah together. For years, success had filled his schedule but left parts of his life empty. Now, for the first time in a very long while, he was beginning to understand what those missing pieces might look like. What Ethan did not realize was that the closer he became to Sarah and Noah, the harder it would become to keep the truth about his life hidden. Over the next month, Ethan became a regular part of Sarah and Noah's life. Not in a dramatic way. Not all at once. It happened through small moments. A Saturday at the park. An afternoon helping Noah build a more advanced model rocket. Dinner at a neighborhood restaurant where everyone knew Sarah by name. The more time Ethan spent with them, the more difficult it became to maintain emotional distance. What started as curiosity had quietly become something deeper. One evening, after Noah had gone inside to grab dessert, Sarah and Ethan sat on the back patio of her house, watching the sun disappear beyond the rooftops. The neighborhood was peaceful. Children rode bicycles down the street. Sprinklers clicked rhythmically across nearby lawns. For a few minutes neither spoke. Then Sarah smiled. "You know something?" Ethan looked at her. "What?" "You are not what I expected." He laughed softly. "Is that a good thing?" "Definitely." She paused. "Most people spend a lot of time talking about themselves. You ask questions. You listen." Ethan looked away briefly. If only she knew how much he was not telling her. The guilt had been growing stronger every week. At first, hiding his identity had felt like a harmless precaution. Now it felt different. Sarah trusted him. Noah trusted him. Yet every meaningful conversation carried an invisible barrier between them. The following Monday, Ethan attended a leadership conference downtown. It was the kind of event he normally could not avoid. Investors, executives, and industry leaders from around the country filled a luxury hotel ballroom. Ethan arrived through a private entrance and spent most of the day in meetings. During a break, one of the organizers approached him. "Excellent presentation this morning," she said. People were talking about it all afternoon. Ethan thanked her politely and continued toward another meeting. What he did not realize was that someone nearby had taken several photos of him speaking on stage. Later that week, Sarah noticed something unusual. She was sitting in the break room at work scrolling through a business article online when a photograph caught her attention. The image showed a crowded conference stage. The face was partially turned away, but for a moment it looked strangely familiar. Sarah frowned and zoomed in. Before she could study it further, a coworker called her name. The moment passed. That evening she met Ethan for dinner. As they talked, she found herself paying closer attention than usual. Certain details suddenly stood out. His knowledge of business. The way he understood corporate negotiations. His ability to explain complicated financial topics effortlessly. None of it matched the simple version of himself he had described. For the first time, a question formed in the back of her mind. Was there something about Ethan's life that she did not know? Across the table, Ethan smiled as Noah excitedly described a school project. But beneath that smile, he felt the pressure building. Every day made the truth harder to reveal. And every day increased the risk that Sarah would discover it from someone else. The truth finally caught up with Ethan on a bright Saturday afternoon. Sarah and Noah had agreed to meet him at a family festival held in one of Chicago's largest parks. Food trucks lined the walkways. Local musicians played on a temporary stage. Families moved between booths while children chased each other across the open grass. It was exactly the kind of simple day Ethan had come to enjoy. For several hours, everything felt normal. Noah convinced Ethan to help him win a stuffed animal at a game booth. Sarah laughed as the two of them debated the best strategy. For a little while, Ethan forgot about boardrooms, investors, and quarterly reports. Then everything changed. As they walked past a sponsor tent near the center of the festival, a sharply dressed man stopped suddenly and stared at Ethan. Recognition flashed across his face. "Mr. Carter," he said loudly. Ethan felt his stomach drop. Sarah looked between them. The man stepped forward with an enthusiastic smile. "I cannot believe it. Ethan Carter. We met at the technology summit last month." Several people nearby turned their heads. Ethan forced a polite smile. "Good to see you again." But the damage had already begun. The man continued talking. "Your keynote speech was incredible. Our entire company has been discussing your expansion plans." Sarah's expression changed instantly. Confusion, surprise, then something else. The man finally noticed her reaction and laughed nervously. "Wait, you do know who he is, right?" Silence settled between them. Sarah looked directly at Ethan. "Who are you?" The question was quiet, but it carried more weight than anything she had ever asked him. Ethan opened his mouth, searching for the right words. None came. That was answer enough. The drive home was silent. Sarah barely spoke after leaving the festival. Noah sensed the tension immediately and remained unusually quiet in the back seat. When they arrived at her house, Sarah stepped onto the porch and turned toward Ethan. "You should have told me." Ethan nodded. "I know. How long were you planning to keep pretending?" Every word hit harder because he knew she had every reason to ask it. "Sarah, I never wanted to hurt you." She folded her arms. "That is not what I asked." Ethan looked down briefly. "I did not know when to tell you." Sarah shook her head. "You knew for months. Every conversation we had was built on something that was not true. Everything else was real," Ethan said quietly. "My feelings for you. My feelings for Noah. None of that was fake." For a moment, Sarah's eyes softened. Then the hurt returned. "Maybe not. But you made a decision for me. You decided I could not be trusted with the truth." Ethan had no response. Because deep down, he feared she was right. Sarah opened the front door. "I need time." Those 4 words felt heavier than any business loss Ethan had ever experienced. The door closed gently behind her. No shouting. No dramatic scene. Just disappointment. And somehow, that hurt even more. As Ethan stood alone on the porch, he realized that losing Sarah was no longer his greatest fear. The real fear was that he might have also lost Noah and the family he never expected to find. The following week felt longer than any Ethan could remember. He respected Sarah's request for space, but that did not make the silence easier. Their daily phone calls disappeared. The text messages stopped. Evenings that had once been filled with conversations now felt painfully empty. Ethan threw himself into work, yet nothing seemed capable of distracting him for very long. During meetings, his mind wandered. During presentations, he caught himself thinking about Sarah's expression on the porch. More than once, he reached for his phone before remembering there were no new messages waiting. Across town, Sarah was struggling in her own way. She wanted to stay angry. Part of her felt she had every right to be. Trust mattered to her. Honesty mattered. Yet every time she replayed the past few months in her mind, she ran into the same problem. The person she remembered was still Ethan, the man who helped Noah with science projects, the man who listened when she talked about difficult days, the man who never treated her with anything except respect. One evening, Sarah sat at the kitchen table reviewing paperwork while Noah worked on homework nearby. After several minutes, he looked up from his notebook. "Are you mad at Ethan?" Sarah hesitated. Children often noticed more than adults expected. "It is complicated." Noah considered that answer carefully. "Because he is rich?" Sarah almost smiled. Leave it to an 8-year-old to reduce a complicated situation to one sentence. "Not exactly." Noah set down his pencil. "Then why?" Sarah searched for the right words. "Because he did not tell us the truth." Noah thought about that for a moment. Did he lie about liking us? The question caught her completely off guard. "No," she admitted. "I do not think he did." Noah nodded slowly. "Then maybe he was scared." Sarah looked at her son. "Why would he be scared?" Noah shrugged. "Sometimes people hide things because they think other people will leave." The simplicity of the answer settled over the room. Sarah found herself staring at the table. Children did not always understand every detail, but they often understood emotions surprisingly well. The next afternoon, Noah asked if he could work on a school project after dinner. Sarah agreed. Hours later, she noticed he was unusually quiet in his room. Curious, she knocked softly and stepped inside. Noah quickly covered a piece of paper. "Nothing," he said. Sarah smiled suspiciously. "That usually means something." Noah hesitated before handing it to her. It was a drawing. 3 people standing together beneath a bright blue sky. Sarah recognized herself immediately. She recognized Noah. Then she noticed the third figure, Ethan. Above the drawing, Noah had written a simple sentence in careful handwriting. My favorite team. Sarah stared at the picture for several seconds. Suddenly, all the complicated emotions she had been carrying seemed less certain. She still felt hurt. She still believed Ethan should have told the truth sooner. But for the first time, she began wondering whether forgiveness and trust might not be the same thing. Perhaps trust could be rebuilt, and perhaps some mistakes deserved a second chance. 3 days later, Sarah found herself standing outside the downtown office building that housed Carter Technologies. She had driven there during her lunch break. Without fully deciding what she planned to say, the drawing Noah had made remained folded inside her purse. Somehow, every time she looked at it, her certainty about ending things became harder to maintain. After checking in at the reception desk, she was escorted to the top floor. The elevator doors opened to a view of Chicago stretching across the horizon. Moments later, Ethan stepped out of his office and stopped when he saw her. Surprise crossed his face first, then hope. Sarah. For a second, neither moved. Then she held up a hand. Before you say anything, I need to say something first. Ethan nodded quietly. Sarah took a breath. What you did hurt me. I need you to know that. I know, he answered immediately. And I am sorry. There was no defense in his voice. No excuses. Just honesty. Sarah continued. The money never bothered me. The company never bothered me. It was the fact that you did not trust me with the truth. Ethan looked down briefly. You are right. He met her eyes again. I spent years meeting people who only cared about what I had. Eventually, I became afraid that everyone would. Then I met you and Noah. His voice softened. The longer I waited, the harder it became to tell you. I was afraid that if I did, I would lose what mattered most. Sarah studied him carefully. For the first time since the festival, she saw no walls. No carefully controlled version of himself. Just the man she had come to know. After a long moment, she reached into her purse and handed him Noah's drawing. Ethan unfolded the paper slowly. When he saw the words "my favorite team" written above the 3 figures, he became very quiet. Sarah watched emotion fill his eyes. He talks about you every day, she said. Ethan swallowed hard. I miss him. He misses you too. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Sarah smiled faintly. Trust takes time to rebuild. Ethan nodded. I understand. But rebuilding it is not impossible. For the first time in weeks, a genuine smile appeared on his face. A few days later, Ethan received an invitation to Noah's next school science presentation. This time, when he arrived, nobody was hiding anything. Sarah knew exactly who he was. Noah certainly did not care. As soon as Ethan walked through the door, Noah ran over holding a new rocket model. You made it. Ethan laughed. I would not miss it. The presentation was a success, but the moment Ethan remembered most happened afterward. The 3 of them stood together outside the school beneath a clear afternoon sky. Noah looked from Sarah to Ethan and grinned. So, does this mean our team is back together? Sarah and Ethan exchanged a glance. Then Sarah smiled. I think it does. Noah celebrated as if his favorite baseball team had just won a championship. Months later, success, wealth, and headlines still followed Ethan everywhere he went. But none of those things felt as important as they once had. Because every Sunday afternoon, he sat around a kitchen table with Sarah and Noah, sharing stories, laughter, and ordinary moments. The life he had spent years searching for was never hidden inside a boardroom or a bank account. It was sitting across from him all along. And for the first time, Ethan understood that the greatest thing he had ever built was not a company. It was a family.